The U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis had presented a preliminary version of the new plan to defeat ISIS in Syria and Iraq, a Pentagon spokesman, Navy Captain Jeff Davis, said on February the 28th. The plan was aimed on making a devastating impact on the terrorist group. While the plan is reportedly trans-regional and aimed on defeating ISIS and Al-Qaeda around the globe, the United States has little space to maneuver. In any case, the Syrian cities of Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor and the Iraqi city of Mosul will be the main targets of the US-led military efforts against ISIS in Syria. There is no doubt that Iraqi security forces, actively backed by the US Air Force and the US Special Forces, will retake western Mosul from ISIS. This is just a matter of time. This move will not finish the war on ISIS in Iraq, but will mark its transformation of the ISIS strategy. The group will focus the guerrilla warfare in the areas formerly controlled by Iraqi security forces and its Western allies. The situation over Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor are more complex and involve a wide range of regional and global powers. In this case, the problem is that if the US will involve Turkey in the Raqqa operation, this decision will dramatically worsen its relations with the Syrian Kurds, which is the core and the only real fighting force in the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces. Thus, the US will have lost the only loyal or at least semi-loyal force on the ground and will be pushed to rely on the Turkish armed forces and Qatari and Saudi Arabian special forces, which are likely involved. At the same time, this will allow Damascus and Moscow to argue that Qatar and Saudi Arabia are sides of the conflict now officially. Now, Doha and Riyadh deny their de facto involvement in the war, even despite their constant support to terrorist groups in Syria. In turn, the mainstream media and their think tanks, which receive funding from the Gulf monarchies, blame Tehran for the involvement in the conflict. If the US decides to decline the Turkish request to participate in the Raqqa offensive, it will lead to the Turkish-Kurdish escalation in Syria and will push the Pentagon to use its troops actively in operations on the ground. Clashes between Ankara-led forces and the US-backed SDF erupted west of Manbij in March. The former presence of the US Special Forces did not help its Kurdish allies. The tense situation also pushed the SDF to intensify its contacts with the legitimate Syrian government. The plan submitted by Mattis also includes a proposal to increase the number of US military contingent to combat ISIS in Syria, the move repeatedly forecasted by South Front. Without a significant US presence on the ground, the SDF will hardly be able to retake Raqqa from ISIS without unacceptable losses. The third option, widely denied by mainstream US politicians, is to cooperate with Moscow and Damascus. Such a cooperation will rapidly lead to a defeat of ISIS in Syria and liberation of Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. Furthermore, the successful attacks of the Syrian army and its allies against ISIS in eastern Aleppo and Palmyra clearly shows that Tehran, Damascus, and Moscow have enough resources to contribute to the war on ISIS. However, the US-Russian cooperation will likely be constrained or even roughly sabotaged because of the hardcore Moscow-phobia of the US deep state. As to Deir ez-Zor, the US can try to use militants trained in Jordan to launch an attack on Deir ez-Zor from the southern direction. However, the total failure of this US-backed group in 2016 leaves little chances that it's able to combat ISIS successfully in 2017. So, the US and its allies will be pushed to deploy special forces units or even ground troops to support their advance there. The Polish special forces have already been deployed to Jordan, where they will operate alongside their French and British counterparts. According to reports, the US-led bloc created a joint command center to coordinate efforts of all sides, which will support the advance against ISIS in the area. Thus, the fate of ISIS as a semi-state entity in Syria and Iraq is predestined. The stiff pressure in central Syria from the Iranian-Syrian-Russian alliance and the intensification of the US-led operations in eastern Syria and in western Iraq are rapidly leading to the collapse of the self-proclaimed caliphate. The question is, how will the spheres of influence be divided after the ISIS defeat?